Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Leading at a Local Level with myself, Tim, and my good friend, John. How are you this morning, John?
I'm all right, thanks, Tim. Yeah, good to be here with you again. How are you?
Oh, well, absolutely, yes. You said the sun is shining where you are. The sun is not shining where I am.
Yeah, I just had to close a curtain because it's just blinding me. So,
Oh, dear.
Too much sun.
Too much. Don't say there's too much sun. There's too much sun. I'm currently trying to plan a mission trip for January, February, so that I don't have to be in the country in the horrible, windy,
nice.
weather. So, you know how much I love the rain and the wind, John, don't you?
Absolutely. Love
Absolutely. Good. But John, we're continuing our season, aren't we, in people wisdom? So this is number 3. And we've talked really about what people wisdom is and what we think it is. And really, it's all about this whole idea, isn't it, about the disconnect. The disconnect between, we've called it overcoming the disconnect. You can have a great leader who's a great guy or great lady, who's a fantastic kind of person, high integrity. They've got some great ideas. They've got some real leadership skills, but there's a disconnect in the middle. And what we're trying to probe at is recognizing that some of that disconnect is really about the subject of people wisdom, isn't it? About being wise about how we handle people. And so for us, people wisdom it's about, I'll shove our little model up on the screen, shall we?
Yeah.
And it's really about being God aware, aware of what God is doing in the situation. It's being about self-aware of who we are, about our strengths, our weaknesses, our blind spots, valuing others, about encouraging other people, seeing what God is doing in them, trying to encourage that, hearing them, managing our own emotions, and being able to really get a feel for what the group is feeling or the wider group of people at any one time. And so that's kind of the model. That's what we think when we talk about people wisdom. That's what we mean. And so today we've done God aware. We're going to move on to number 2. And number 2 is what, John? What is number 2 today?
It is self-awareness. There you go. I've got the right one for you.
So, yeah, I'm obviously the most self-aware person ever. Tell me all about self-awareness.
Well, look, I'm still struggling to get my hair cut often enough. So my wife, I think she wonders about my self-awareness in that sort of regard. But basically, self-awareness is the ability to recognize and understand your own emotions, like your tendencies, your thoughts, your strengths, your weaknesses, and so on. But it's not just about recognizing them. So that's one step. But it's actually then about being aware of the effect of those on other people. Yeah. And self-aware people are typically sort of more open, like to new experiences, new ideas, and have the sense of trying to learn from those experiences. So the sort of questions I might ask you, you don't have to answer these, Tim, is, do you know what makes you tick? Do you know what triggers anger in you? Come on, I'm sure you've got an example of what triggers anger in you, Tim.
My children.
Hooray!
My child is a faffer. You're like, Nathan, it's 2 minutes. You've got to be out of the house in 2 minutes, and then you discover that 2 minutes later he's done absolutely nothing. Yes.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Bless it. Well, there you go. You are still
it's an example, but yeah. It's
another thing is, do you know how you learn best, for example, or here's another one for you, Tim. How do you react to pain?
I hate pain. I've realised actually I'm terrible with pain. My wife tells me that basically I'm terrible with any form of physical pain. I really am. Not. It really affects my ability to lead. I'm basically a wuss.
And that's taken you time to work out, hasn't it? How much? No, I'm joking. It does take time, doesn't it? Some things these just take time. Over the course of our lives, we become aware of these things. So it's about awareness, but it's also about action. So a couple of silly examples there, but I wonder if you've been a bit more constructive with my questions. Tim, give us another example of how you have kind of become more self-aware in the last few years.
So what I've realised, you say what makes me tick. What makes me tick is challenge. So I realised that money is not a motivator for me. I always found this at work. Money doesn't motivate me. Money's nice. Obviously, it's nice to have more money, but it just doesn't motivate me. Even what others think of me is not actually that important to me. What motivates me and what makes me tick is challenge. Yeah. And so I am liable to get bored once the challenge goes out of something. And that was a massive revelation to me, because I realised in my leadership, you talk about being self-aware, straight away, I am in one of my leadership weaknesses is that if I'm not careful, I'll move on to a new thing or a new project because I'm bored, because I lack challenge, and I don't follow through enough on things. And rather than seeing a high level of impact on something which takes time, I give up because I'm bored. Basically, I'll move on to the next thing once the initial fascination passes. So that to me has been a huge revelation.
So I'm assuming you've probably always been like that. So it's not that your personality has changed. So, but you've become more aware of it. So how has that revelation actually made a difference to you? It's nice to know, but how has it actually changed what you do?
So I've realised that, I need to be a bit more patient. So I even have in my to-do list, remember a while ago we talked about to-do lists. I have a section in my to-do list now called Tim's Brand New Crazy Ideas. And I put them there and I park them into that zone because I'm aware that, if I'm not careful, I'm just seeking a new challenge and something's new it's exciting. And so that I do that. But also one thing that I've realised is if I start to feel fed up, and often I do, and Helen and I and my wife will often talk about this, we'll say, the problem is you've got no challenge at the moment. There's nothing that's really new or like exciting or challenging. You need to go and find something that's going to test you. I mean, a good example, right, is that I got really into cycling a few years ago, and we went and cycled across France and through to Belgium and did loads of these like really long distance rides, and I was really fit, and I was actually at one point really quite relatively competitive. But the moment the challenge has gone out of it, now I can't be bothered to get on the bike at all. Do you know what I mean? It's awful when it comes to exercise. Just like, I need a challenge. I'm not someone that can do things like just consistently. And so it's discipline. I'm learning discipline, which makes me a better leader.
Yeah.
What about you?
That's really helpful. That's really helpful. What about me? Well, I mean, I've been learning a lot about myself. I mean, one thing for me is that I'm not a detail person. And again, that's something that you may think, well, that's obvious. Didn't you always know that about yourself? Well, yes, I did. But I think what was caught up around that was my idea of what I should be. And so I'd find myself getting very frustrated when I can't sort of complete tasks like reading minutes or preparing in detail for podcasts, things like that. I'm so big picture that I find myself really frustrated, but I volunteer to do things that I thought I should do those things. I should do that job. And sometimes I just need to do it and get on with it, right? So that there is some part of job that I like that. But I find myself volunteering because I thought that's what a leader does, or that's what a leader should do. And then find myself just getting frustrated, being bogged down with detail. And so that doesn't mean that I avoid detail. It just means that I'm just aware that I need a certain mindset, at a certain time of the day where I'm quite good with detail, which is about 5 minutes in the morning. So just knowing kind of myself, my patterns, has been really helpful. Knowing when I work best, that's been a huge revelation for me. So instead of trying to set aside a whole day to do a project, let's say, for example, a whole day of like my dictations for my medical work or a whole day of writing a talk, I now know that I'm best doing that in the morning. So I do 2 mornings, and then in the afternoons, I do all my phone calls and emails so just things like that have helped me a huge deal.
Go on, sorry. One thing I've found, and I think it's just been my experience, is people, the number of people that are not actually very self-aware. There's a lot of people that are not very self-aware at all, and they think they are. They think they know themselves, but then they do some of the things we're going to suggest later, and it's like a revelation to them. Like, wow, I didn't realize I struggled with this stuff so much, or this was, and once you get a bit of self-awareness, it does make you much more able to lead effectively.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's ironic. I mean, some people, listening, watching might say, hang on a minute, we've talked previously in podcasts on this network. I think it was one of the big chats about the gospel of self, right? Yeah. And actually, we need to be kind of rejecting this gospel of self, which is self-centered and all about me and very introspective, and just look up at God. And I think it's just important that we just kind of acknowledge that and say what we're not talking about. We're not talking about a self-actualizing, kind of becoming our best selves kind of approach. That's not what this is about. The goal is, of course, to become more like Christ, to become a more Christ-like leader. And it's also not about self-indulgence. Again, people like talking about themselves, right? and it could become very self-indulgent. So we need to weigh this up, and that's why we've got our lovely model that we showed you. It needs to be weighed up alongside other things. One of the key things being that we put other people before us. We value others more than ourselves, and it also doesn't replace knowing God. And I'm reassured that John Calvin, the great writer in the Institutes, he said nearly all wisdom that we possess consists of two parts. It's the knowledge of God and it's the knowledge of ourselves.
Yeah,
and actually, which one informs the other, he goes on to say, is hard to tell. But he says, actually, it's key to our pursuit of knowing God, actually, a sense of knowing ourselves. And we know it, don't we, through Scripture? I'm not going to preach about it, but I think we can see in Scripture, the idea of knowing which part of the body you are. Okay, there's a degree of self-awareness. If you're a finger, just knowing that you're a finger and not a toe. Quite helpful, right? Understanding spiritual gifts. That's what Paul encourages us to.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, some good examples there, John. Yeah.
So I think that's really important that we reflect on that. We're not supposed to be becoming completely otherworldly, not ourselves. We are called to flee from our sin and selfish desires, but actually, it's not all parts of our personality, the way God has shaped us and made us. And God has uniquely shaped and made us with different gifts, different strengths, and recognizing those and acknowledging those in God's service is, I think, part of good stewardship of what God's given us. So there you go. Try not to preach. Does that make some sense?
Oh, John, it does. And I think again, I think we need to be cautious about overreacting either way about, self, because obviously, what the world has tapped into is that, the knowledge of self is a powerful thing. And they've gone too far the other way. And they're you'd say people have pursued the knowledge of self rather than the knowledge of God. But equally, as in the Bible, it does talk, doesn't it, about the knowledge. There is a degree of knowledge of self. We need to be aware of our own, a wretched man I am, as Paul says. He's self-aware of his own sinfulness, his own failure. He's aware of, those things. Again, I think you've got a couple of in your notes, you identified a couple of proverbs, didn't you, John, that you thought?
Yeah. Well, one of my favourite proverbs is the purposes of man's heart are like deep waters, but a man of discernment draws them out. It's Proverbs 25. And we are like deep waters, which does mean that don't be depressed if you're thinking, oh man, I'm not very self-aware. Our hearts are like deep waters. It does take time and a lot of sort of dredging sometimes to find what's going on.
And one of the other challenges with self-awareness is it's not a one and done. So you are changing. God is changing you. God is changing me. My situation, my circumstances change, and so therefore, at times, I need to be aware again of how I've changed, I guess, and how the situation's changed me, and what I'm aware. So often, anger, for example, in pastoral ministry, people have got a problem with anger. It's a lack of self-awareness. As you just identified, it's a lack. If they were more aware of what it was that triggered that anger, they would be able to actually get a handle on it better. It's no good just praying, Lord, take away my anger. I think you actually need to identify what's the cause of this anger. If you've got men that are seeking affection in pornography, for example, what is it that causes? What is it that's underneath that? If you can't resolve that, you're going to struggle to. It's not just praying and hoping it's going to go away. You've got to be aware, I guess. So to me, it's biblical. It's godly, really.
And we do it the context of family. We're talking into a context where we're not just individuals alone with our little self-help, self-awareness books. Like, this is in the context of doing life with people. And you look at being in a family. I think most of us will have been either growing up in a family or parents or relatives of children. And actually, that's part of growing as a child. It's to actually start to understand yourself, to understand your strengths and your weaknesses. It's a safe place where we grow.
We do that a lot with our kids. Do you do? I mean, I guess you do that with a lot of kids. We identify, like Nathan. Nathan is, one of my boys. He's a faffer. Like he's a bit of, if you leave him to his own devices, he'll faff around. And it's making him aware that that's why he gets into trouble, not trouble, but why he gets himself under pressure, because he's a faffer. And so helping him understand that is important for him to grow through that. How can you grow through something you don't understand? So. Yeah. John, how do we become more self-aware then? Go on. Oh, sorry, you're going to...
Yeah, no, well, I was just going to say that it's just being patient as well sometimes. That,
Yeah,
sometimes we're just, and these things happen stepwise. A 5-year-old child will be different place to a 12-year-old child and what they can learn. So there is linking it back to that sense as Christians, we're ultimately saying to God, look, God, I'm open to be more self-aware, but I'm
yeah,
also aware that if I'm alive at 80 or 90 years of age, I'll probably still have a lot of growing to do. So as you say, it's
yes,
not once and for all. So
yeah,
growing, it's an openness to being a teachable person.
absolutely.
So yeah. So how do we grow more self aware? Well, okay, I wonder if we can put up just a little table, which will describe, if you're listening, which is the components of self awareness, and there's 4 of them. And so one of them is the obvious one. It's in the open. Okay, so I can see this area. I can see this strength or this weakness that I've got, and others can see it as well. So I think that's probably quite obvious. I won't give any examples there, but in the open. So that's the first one. The
Can I say
second
that,
one,
that's normally the most obvious one is people say, and leaders say, I'm bad at administration,
yeah,
because they
that's right.
hate
And everyone
administration.
else around them says, "Amen."
Yeah, and everyone else knows that you're bad at administration. And
Yeah,
then I think, well, I'm self-aware because I know I'm not good at administration. It's like, yeah, but that's the easy part. Everyone
yeah,
knows you're bad at administration. You
yeah.
know it. Go on, sorry.
Yeah, and that will link to what we talk about later on about being others aware, because actually the impact of that on other people, we can become
Yeah,
so comfortable with our self awareness, like, oh yeah, I'm rubbish at this, but actually we're still not seeing how it impacts other people. It becomes a joke, but for some people it's not. So yeah, you're right. In the open. Secondly, blind spots. This is really interesting. So this is your blind spots. This is things that I can't see but others can see. So plenty of other people can see it. So have you got any examples, Tim, of where you can anonymize them if you like, but of where somebody's been kind of really not self-aware, but other people have seen it?
I don't have any blind spots, John. Just
Oh,
I've reached a point of true self-awareness. um, yeah, I think kind of. Just talking, you know me, I like to be honest and open. I'd say that, like, particularly say it just very simply in the context of our marriage. Often it's my wife that will
yeah,
identify you're on the limit, you're on the edge, and I'm not seeing it. I'm fine, she's like, yeah, but you're short with the kids. You're up and down. You're kind of, you're shorter tempered or whatever, and it's like, oh, I can't see that, and so I need that. I think in terms of leadership, I think one of the leaders that I worked in a school context, she had a bit of a wild temper. And she would kind of lose and what she would see, she would understand she got stressed, but she just could not realize the impact. Basically, she was intimidating, and she didn't realize that she was very intimidating to be around because she was volatile and
yeah,
unpredictable, and she
yeah,
didn't realize that she was volatile and unpredictable, and so it made it very difficult for people to work
yeah,
for her, because you would think you'd be able to see that, but she just couldn't, or she didn't certainly acknowledge it. She didn't. She
yeah,
was just volatile, and she couldn't see that she was volatile, but everybody else could, and everybody else felt it.
yeah. Yeah, and so what we're saying is that's really helpful, because the solution is lies in other people.
Yeah,
So other people will reveal your blind spots, because just by definition, we're not going to find them ourselves. But we can start to ask questions. So it might be, you might be thinking, listening to this, thinking, oh, I'm not sure what my blind spots are. Sometimes just analysing, have repeated things happen? Have I
yeah,
noticed that I seem to be getting the same result over the years? People have walked out from my team, for example. The question then is, maybe there's a blind spot, and what we need to do is, as we've dealt with in another episode, is actually through relationship, through trusted feedback and input, as you say, like might be from your spouse or from someone who's close to you, to say, would you, and be vulnerable enough to say, would you be willing to help me identify a blind spot here?
yeah. And I think another blind spot I think I've noticed with a lot of leaders is their ability to dominate a conversation.
Yeah,
So to dominate a conversation, I think, and what happens when you're dominating, they don't realize they're dominating the conversation. I know that I do it and I can't see it because I'm enthusiastic, I'm
yeah,
passionate. We use the phrase passionate. We say, I feel strongly the Lord's given me this, this thing to do. And actually other people are not engaging with that because they feel dominated. They feel like, oh, you're just pushing this on me. I can't see that. you know.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really big one. We're going to talk about voices later, aren't we? But it's just sometimes your voice is not just talking about your vocal voice, but your presence, the way you communicate, switches people off and you don't see it.
Yeah, and I think it's the thing that, and again, I hopefully say this with humility, knowing that I've been a victim of this as well. But when you see people going around with big blind spots, and you see it harming their leadership, or you see it harming themselves and other people, I find it really sad. And it's one of the things that I think, as we've been talking about this series, has excited me most and motivates me most, and gets me really genuinely quite passionate about this, because it is just devastating, really, sometimes the impacts of blind spots. And over years, and it's really sad when they've been leading for a long time and no one's had the nerve to say it to them. And it becomes harder and harder, doesn't it, to say, and probably harder and harder to receive. If someone tells you for the last 20 years, this is how you've come across, part of me would be quite angry. I'd be like, well, why didn't you tell me before? Oh, because we were too, probably oftentimes it's because we were too scared to. Because we were too worried about how you might react. And so we need to be thinking about that. If someone points us out something in their feedback, are we ready? And it comes back to our security, doesn't it? As we talked about last episode, are we ready to receive that, and asking God to help us to be ready to receive something that may actually wound us and make it hard to hear. So blind spots, we could talk for ages about that, but we won't. Hidden spots. So this is the things that I can see, but others can't see. And so this is the being we're maybe aware of ourselves, be aware of, and oftentimes it's sin, it's things that we feel ashamed about, it's things in secret. So for leaders, that we've mentioned pornography, might be eating in secret, you name it, lots of things that actually we're aware of, but no one else knows about. And the solution to that is confession. That's going to come from us to reveal.
Well, I think also there's a big component of leadership where you protect yourself, rightly. So obviously you've talked about a couple of more kind of negative examples, things like kind of overeating or kind of doing things that are kind of harmful in the private place. But there's also, I think, a responsibility to allow others to see things. There are things that are going on. So if you're feeling under pressure, for example, it's letting someone else see that. It's not just confessing the negative. It's also allowing other people to see that. And maybe it's just allowing other people to see your thought process. I'm a very external processor, as many people that work with me will know. Again, I talk about being self-aware. I didn't realize that, again, for ages, that I would process externally, and people would think, they'd go like, right, okay, Tim's going to do this, we're doing this. And I was like, no, I'm just talking about it. And I've become aware that happens. So what I do now is I now sort of will put a sort of a kind of a line under what I say, which is, this is just in the idea phase. Don't do anything about this. Like, I'm just thinking out loud. But I realise for some leaders, they're the opposite, and all of their thinking goes on in their head, or in very small, tight groups of people, and then they come and present a complete solution. And it's like realizing that actually, like, there's a whole part of self-awareness that's saying, I need you to see my process. I need you to understand my thoughts, and to be, not just to be hidden, but to open up a bit more. And then I can, because then as a person, you talk about, being people wise, there are many people that want to be part of the process. And if you hide that from them, you're excluding them. You're not being wise in how you handle it, because they want to know that you've come on this journey, and they want to walk with you over the last kind of month of thinking this through. Whereas when you present it as a, here it is, they're like, oh, well,
job done.
I don't feel connected to this. So
no, hugely helpful. You're absolutely right. And that just illustrates the idea of self-awareness, not just being about what we understand about ourselves, but actually then how we impact other people, and taking action. So that's great. And then last of all is the unknown spots, and these are the things that I can't see and others can't see, and these are things that we may not know for a long time, or we may know in 10 years' time. We think, goodness me, I wasn't even aware of that. And so those are things that we, through experience, often over time, and through God revealing things to us, through other people as well at times. But the unknown spots become smaller, if you like, in our lives. That would be the hope.
And I think that's why when we talk about being God aware, John, you know, is that, again, this isn't just a self-reflective process, but it's sort of just, I mean, was it Psalm 139 that says, doesn't it? Search me, O God. Show me if there's any kind of, is it wicked way in me? I think, you know, it's like really sort of, it's that is, you know, the psalmist being, you know, allowing God to make himself aware, really. So you see it right there, don't you? And I think, you know, we can't stress and strain about that, but we can just just allow God to, you know, and others to speak.
Absolutely. Great. So, I mean, in terms of just as we kind of close really practically, just thinking through some ways that we can become more self-aware. And I think probably the fundamental thing, and we would keep saying this all the way through, is it can come through being on our own and sort of praying and reflecting, but often it comes as we're in community, as we rub up against others. That's the arena in which, you know, and it can be really uncomfortable at times, where self-awareness can actually grow, but in a safe environment where we know and love one another, respect one another, that can very much be the case. And so there's some things that we found helpful, isn't it, Tim? So one of them is personality tests, which is, I'm sure some of you listening thinking, here we go. Which personality test is going to tell me everything I need to know about myself? And the reality is that none of them will tell you everything. Many of them will try and sort of put you in some kind of box, or some people think, it's going to tell me if I'm a leader or not, but it doesn't. It's just going to explain actually a bit more about who we are. But they're like pieces of a jigsaw. And so if we kind of put too much emphasis on any single one of them, we'll either be dominated by this one, or it'll become self-fulfilling prophecies about who we are. But I found them, I don't know about you, Tim, I found some particularly to be really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I mean, both of you and I have done a great number, actually. And I think my encouragement to you is don't worry too much about which of these personality assessments you do. You know, some of them are really accurate, some of them are slightly less accurate. I did one that's really expensive that got paid for me for an organisation I was working with called the Insights. And that was absolutely it was like reading a book into your life. It was really powerful. And Helen did it with her. She worked for the NHS, and she had to do it for one of her jobs. And she then brought hers home and was like, oh, look at this. And it was like, and we realised that we're basically terribly incompatible. We're like the most opposite. And so much of our conflicts happen. But yeah, I think there's loads. I mean, which ones would you recommend, John? Which ones do you particularly like?
Well, I particularly like 5 Voices. So that's a free assessment. You can do that at 5voices.com. It's numerical 5 is on the screen. I find that absolutely brilliant, and that really just looks at your dominant voice. It says that everyone has different voices. So, for example, pioneer voice, a nurturer voice, a connector voice. Everyone can use all of those voices, but we tend to kind of speak more with one more than the other, a bit like we can all use our right and our left hand, but you know, I'm right hand dominant, and that's what I'll tend to go to. Some voices are louder than others, some are quieter, but the general principle, and why I love it, is it's because it's saying we need to learn to value and appreciate all the voices. And I'm one of the loud voices. I'm kind of one of these creative pioneer people who, you know, can be quite arrogant at times, think that, you know, I've got the vision, I'm the best person to, you know, speak the vision to other people because I'll inspire people. And, you know, I can get frustrated at the Guardian type people who ask questions and want to do the detail and ask if we've got the budget for it. Like, what? We talk about budget. We just need to do it. But I found it incredibly helpful, not just for me in understanding my kind of tendencies, but when I've actually then reflected on some other people in my team who are different to me, but I tell you what, they're just as valuable. And it's totally accelerated for me my appreciation of others on a team and seeing where I fit in it, and just, I hope, having a bit more humility about who I am. So that I love that test.
So the one that I enjoy, the one that I like, this is paid. This is called workinggenius.com. By a guy called Patrick Lencioni and his team. And you know, again, I think I paid about £15 or something to do it, which, to be honest, for me was a good investment in understanding some things about myself. I think this one's really, yeah, it was just very powerful. There's 6 different things that you are, and I was actually slightly surprised by what I was. And there's a whole lot of podcasts that they've done that kind of tie up with that you can find for free that explain it. If you don't want to do the assessment, you can just look up the stuff. But again, I don't think it really matters, John, which one you do. I mean, we've got one that we'll talk about in the next one about being others aware around I think it's called True Colours, which is free, and we'll happily send you that. We just found it. I think a friend of mine called Brad found it a few years ago and found it helpful. But I would encourage you, if you haven't done any of these, do some. If you want to know, just get in touch. Just comment below and we'll send you some of these things, some other ones that we found helpful. But I think, as you say, John, it simply, these things will reveal things about yourself that you weren't aware of. I mean, you can do the Belbin test. Myers-Briggs is another one you can do. You've done Myers-Briggs.
Whatever you do, I did last night with some of my leaders. We did 5 voices, but I was clear to say to them, this isn't about doing 5 voices and working out who you are. It's giving us an excuse to have a conversation about how we lead and how we develop others and how we become aware of our strengths and our weaknesses. And it was a great discussion. We didn't do too much detail on who was what, actually. We just talked about, it was a great model, just a way just to kind of conversation to flow from. So questionnaires really, personality test really, really sort of helpful on that front. A second thing in terms of developing self-awareness, we've alluded to it already, is to ask trusted friends. You can go back to our episode on feedback. The question, one of my favorite questions to ask others, which is a vulnerable question as well, is what's it like to be on the other side of me? And that's sometimes not just about the very practical things like, you send too many emails or whatever. It might be another comment. It might be like, John, you're always just so lively and full of life, and whatever happens, you're at the same level. You're just enthusiastic all the time. But actually, there are times when I'm struggling or we're struggling, and it feels like you don't kind of seem to recognize that. So it might be a tonal thing, how you come across, and having other people being free to speak to you about that is a very wonderful thing.
It's a very scary thing, though, honestly, isn't it? I mean, it is I think, again, I'm an external processor. I'm very, to be honest, truthfully, quite secure, in myself, in the Lord. And I think, I've got a lot of friends who I think, we've loved over the years, like you and I have loved to kind of talk and analyze one another. And so I think we've done a lot of that, but it's really scary for some people. Really, really scary, like to sit and do that with someone. That's why sometimes, again, maybe doing a personality test with a friend, right? Do one of these tests with a friend, even if you're not doing it as an organization. Do 5 voices and have a conversation about it and say, do you think that this makes sense? Does that resonate with you? And that maybe be the basis of a conversation with people. But do it with your spouse if you're married. Like that's a powerful conversation to have with your wife. Realizing how you communicate and how she communicates. I mean, so often, so many marriage problems could be resolved by people doing some of these kind of things. So absolutely, you have the courage to ask people, John, isn't it?
Yeah, and you're right about the security thing. And I think that comes down to, and so often, is having an environment in which we are, like, we're affirmative and encourages. I think that provides, an environment where, maybe in a church, for example, where we appreciate people for who they are and how God's made them to be. And we're quick to do that, and that it doesn't just stay silent until we sort of say, well, let's have a discussion about strengths and weaknesses. Oh, by the way, you could do this better. I mean, that's like a dagger to the heart. But if it's in the context of, I know that this person or this group of people, they love me and I'm appreciated. But I think just for us all to be upfront and say, like, we all have weaknesses. But actually, some of us will be, as you say, more comfortable talking about them than others is really important. And so we'll come on to that in future episodes about how we sort of gauging other, being aware of others and where they're at and what they might be able to cope. I think a third sort of thing we sort of suggest is just almost more personally keeping a journal. Might be you just decide to discuss with others instead, but sometimes just logging how things have played out. And I found that quite helpful. Okay, today, what happened? Oh, this happened. I had a bit of an argument with somebody at work. Hang on a minute. I've kind of made a note of this same thing happening over the last year. Let's go back and have a look. So sometimes just being able to identify those patterns and to reflect on mistakes, just personally, it's something I've found helpful, keeping a journal of some parts of my day, highlights, lowlights, and so on.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I'm terrible at doing anything on a daily basis. So apart from maybe reading and praying, but so keeping a daily journal is a challenge for me. But
yeah. Well, that's fair enough, and it's different things for different. So for some people, they'll say, "Yeah, I journal anyway," but that's fine. I could do that. I could incorporate it. And some of you would just have never done it and think, "Crazy idea." But the point is, there's no one way. But there are a number of ways. And anything else you'd add, Tim? As we probably
I think the point about journal is, how are you self-reflecting?
Yeah.
So I journal through talking to my friends, honestly. Yeah. So I spend a lot of time. My kids always say, you spend loads of time on the phone, and I do. I like it. I like being on the phone. And then when I talk to you, talk to my friend Pat, my brother Mark, or my dad, or maybe John or Daniel and Elton. Some of the guys that I'm friends with. And I just. And I like, often those conversations are very self-reflective. What happened? What do we think? So it's a culture that we have. We're always kind of. Yeah. So I do it verbally because I do most things verbally. So whereas again, if you're an introvert and a thinker, then definitely journals are probably very helpful for you.
Yeah. Great. Well, I think we're doing well for time. And just to say that if you have a look at some of the questions, we'll put some of this together. Worth just reflecting on some questions that we're sending out for each episode. Hopefully, will just help develop your thinking. As Tim said, do get in touch if we can send anything on your way in the process.
Yeah. And I think it's fair to say as well, like, one of the things that we're very happy to do, John and I, we've said this before, if you want to just have a chat to us, one of us, just get in touch and have a phone call about some of these, you think, I don't, I'm maybe not self-aware, what should I do, can I have some help, then I'm probably not going to be inundated, John, with requests, but we're really happy. I mean, honestly, we do say that, very happy to have a phone call or a conversation. We just, we're not just banging this stuff out because we like talking to each other and making fancy graphics. We're doing it because we want to help people, want to equip the church, want to really help equip you, that you might go on and lead effectively where you are, and the kingdom of God may expand. And so anything we can do to help, we'd love to just sit and chat with you and have a coffee if you're local to us or whatever. So we actually enjoy that, don't we, John? It's like
absolutely,
it's one of our favorite things to do.
Absolutely.
Good. All right, I think that ties us up for self-awareness, isn't it? So good. We look forward to the next one. We're going to be looking at valuing others. How do we take all of this information that we've developed about ourselves and make it compatible with others? So
that's right.
Until next time, John.
Yep. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.